of the conference sometime during the month of February. We're going to have about 50 sessions to turn into MP4s, so we'll get those to you and you can share with your colleagues. It is my pleasure to once again welcome one of our favorite faculty, James Casey, Esquire. It has over 20 years of sponsored research experience. He has 2 roles at Florida Gulf Coast University as interim associate vice president for research and sponsored programs and interim director, Emergent Technologies Institute. He is a founding adjunct associate professor in the City University of New York, Master of Science in Research Administration and Compliance program. He has worked in virtually all areas of research administration, but finds his passion in the areas of contracting, data protection, international collaboration, and sponsored research office enhancement re-engineering. He's also passionate about the intersection of law, research administration, and science. Over the past few years, he has expanded his expertise portfolio to include data protection and privacy, and is a CPP, or Certified Privacy Practitioner, for the EU GDPR DPO role. A longtime contributor to Incura, he received the Incura Distinguished Service Award in 2009. Beyond research administration, he's worked in the areas of law and local government. Working in these 3 sectors has given him a breadth of experience and value enhancement. He's active in the legal and research administration communities. He is a State Bar of Wisconsin delegate to the American Bar Association House of Delegates and an ABA representative to the Joint ABA AAAS Standing Committee, National Conference of Lawyers and Scientists. He is a patron fellow of the American Bar Foundation and a life fellow of the Wisconsin Law Foundation. He is barred before the U.S. Supreme Court and the state of Wisconsin. And with all that, please welcome my friend and your faculty member, James Casey.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. It's great to be back just a couple days later. If you're here at 4 o'clock on the East Coast of the United States, you must be a hearty soul. And hopefully you're going to learn a lot of new things, if not immediately useful in your current job, useful in your future career. And that's the way I look at all this. Probably preaching to the choir and saying that research administrators always have to learn something new. Whether you're new in the field or experienced, we always have to learn more. And data protection and privacy are areas that I picked up starting about 5 years ago as a way to build my expertise and to stay fresh. So it's great to talk about data protection and privacy today in this session. And as you'll see on the agenda here, we're going to cover some of its basic conceptual ideas. I will talk a little bit about why data protection is important in academia, specific issues in sponsored research, leading practices and getting to yes, because at the end of the day, getting to yes in sponsored research is one of the prime missions we should have. And at the end, I will wrap up. I will save enough time for Q&A, and at the back end of these slides, you will see some historical information on both U.S. privacy data protection efforts as well as those in Europe. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. So why is data protection important in academia? Well, you probably hear a lot about data breaches in the consumer sector and in the financial sector. And those are quite significant breaches. And if you've ever suffered a breach, you know how much work it takes to fix the breach. But there are breaches in academia. And as you'll see on this slide, that for 15 years, ending in 2020, there were 1,300 data breaches in higher education. And these breaches led to the exposure of 24.5 million records. So one item in terms of you're thinking, you know, why should I care about this stuff? Aside from your own personal situations, data breaches are becoming more, are happening more consistently in higher education. So if you have a role in a university as a privacy officer, you will obviously be very involved in data breaches involving data that the university holds, personal data. If you're out in the real world, if you work in corporate America, there are data breaches involving confidential corporate information, credit card numbers, social security numbers. You know, really, so I think, why is data protection important in academia? Because it impacts a lot of different areas. And unfortunately, most people in the field have the opinion that there will be more of it. So you're forewarned here. Best way to help your institutions and provide value is to keep learning. And this is an important area. So next slide. So basic concepts. And I'm equally guilty of this as others in the field. Sometimes we talk about data protection and data privacy as being one and the same. If you want to really tackle the issue in an academic, consistent way, it is very useful to know what the specific definitions are. And on this slide, you'll see a definition of data protection as the process of safeguarding important data from corruption, compromise, or loss, and providing the capability to restore the data to a functional state should something happen to render the data inaccessible or unusable. And you'll see a source here about what data protection is. And in the estimation of one particular professional society, they consider the three categories of data protection to be traditional data protection, which in many ways is pre-internet age, keeping duplicate files, keeping things on floppy or hard drives, and nowadays thumb drives, making duplicate photocopies, that sort of thing. And then you have data security and data privacy. And it's important to say right off the bat that data protection, data security, and data privacy are three different things, as you'll see on the next slide. So let's advance to that. Data privacy is an area of data protection that concerns the proper handling of sensitive data, including, notably, personal data, but also other confidential data, such as certain financial data, intellectual property data, to meet regulatory requirements, as well as protecting the confidentiality and immutability of the data. I would throw in there confidential corporate information, because some of my work in the Washington, D.C. area, in the area of mergers and acquisitions, involved personal data that got caught up in a corporate merger. And in fact, one of the cases, legal matters I worked on in Washington involved a academic publishing house, of which there was confidential data at issue. And so when you're doing legal work, a lot of lawyers are hired to go through legal documents, and this applies to universities too in litigation, making sure you're redacting personal confidential data or corporate sensitive data and other types of data like I've talked about, which is credit card numbers, social security numbers, personal health information in the clinical realm. And so once again, this is something that is quite extensive in a world of big data. And with algorithms and machine learning slowly making more decisions for us, it really is excellent for this group to be aware of these categories. And as I say at the bottom of this slide, cybersecurity is separate and distinct from data protection and privacy. Some folks think they're all one and the same, but reality, cybersecurity is completely different from the other concepts. One thing in higher education with your IT offices there that are charged with cybersecurity, obviously I can't speak about all of them, but I would say in some of my experience, IT offices consider cybersecurity to be synonymous with data protection or data privacy. And I think that is a great learning opportunity for different units on campus, such as the research office and IT, to work together, because they are all really different. And I think to provide the best value to our institutions and to the faculty and staff and students, we need to be very clear about what we're talking about. Next slide. Okay, here is, at least for the purpose of today, data protection and privacy issues in sponsored research. Now, the first concept here is data protection by design by default. Now, that is language out of the GDPR that has very specific meaning. What that in the European GDPR context means is that not only as an aspiration, but as an expectation with the passage of the GDPR, that entities will build data protection into their systems when they create them, okay? That protecting personal data in the European Union should be the default position, not something you opt into. Very important concept that you need to think about. Now, what I'm doing with it here on this slide is saying, basically turning that language around to say that in the sponsored research in the university context, when it comes to different types of data held by different parts of the university, we should be building data protection in at ground zero. And when I say ground zero, I mean if there are data protection or privacy issues in proposals, at the proposal stage, data protection should be thought about at the proposal stage. That is at the beginning. That is what I call ground zero. What you don't want to do is figure out there are data protection or privacy issues once a project is funded, and then you have to go back and try and fix the issue if there is in fact an issue. So as a synonymous with what the GDPR says, I would say in the sponsored research realm that sponsored research professionals, privacy officers, contracting officers, university leadership, IT leadership should be thinking about data protection at the beginning of every initiative or any proposal, no matter where it is coming from or originating in a university. I think that's incredibly important because I guess on a side note, you know, the internet, as we know it, has been roughly around since 1995 or 1996. And for many years after the establishment of the internet, data protection was not thought about greatly. And quite frankly, people loved the convenience of the internet. And, you know, obviously, Amazon, other retailers online, you know, that sort of thing a lot of people were willing to give up their personal data for the convenience of shopping online. And that is a Faustian bargain that has led to all of these data breaches, often in the range of hundreds of millions of records. And that's why the European Union in the GDPR has had to tackle this. And to their credit, they are saying that data protection should be a right and not a privilege. And that is a concept I agree with, because I was guilty, as many were in America, of simply giving up personal data for the sake of convenience for online shopping and other purposes. So keep that in mind. Data protection by design, by default. The second point kind of is the same thing I'm saying in a way, which is that if you have specific sponsored projects that may have data protection, privacy issues, those should be considered at the beginning, along with other aspects of a scope of work or a project budget. And it is at the beginning stage where data transfer and use agreements are often critical, like other contracts, like teaming agreements and material transfer agreements. It's very important to protect data from the beginning, rather than trying to put the horse in the barn after the horse has left the barn. So keep that in mind. The third point, obviously, if you've been around higher ed or worked in higher ed long enough, you know both the HIPAA and FERPA, the federal statutes that govern these areas. And up until recently, quite frankly, HIPAA and FERPA were the architecture for data protection in the United States. And that's something that at the back slides, when I show the history of US data protection, that'll illustrate this. And the last point at the bottom is that a lot of sponsored research contracts now are coming with clauses, data protection clauses, privacy or cybersecurity contract clauses, okay? This can be money from a European university to an American university, attaching GDPR clauses. You'll see these clauses in procurement and clinical trial contracts. This is all something where, like I talked about Tuesday with contracting, is you have to constantly learn contracting. Similarly here, you have to stay up to date with data protection. And if you're at a big enough university, you're going to see all this with frequency and increasing frequency. So for everyone that's on the call that is very interested in these issues, there are great job opportunities in these areas, and data protection and privacy is only going to grow. And as I talked about on Tuesday, you have issues with algorithms and machine learning, aspects of what you'd call big data or artificial intelligence, that are increasingly having an influence on our lives, whether we know that or not. And that's a pretty scary thing, because a lot of the discourse in the United States today talk about the freedom of people. Well, the internet and the software engineers behind all the websites for everything you visit, they are in fact gently nudging you in certain directions, even if you do not know it. And the beginning of nudging starts with entering passwords to get username and passwords to get into websites. That actually is the first step in getting you, for instance, when you go on Amazon, okay, and you buy something, and then all of a sudden you see it pop up and it says, well, you bought this. Do you want one of these things? Well, that's an algorithm working in the back room. Now, in higher education with research, if you're at a university with significant computer science or engineering work, and in the sciences, the faculty are talking about algorithms left and right. So if you're in pre-award, you're probably seeing all this talk about algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence. So this is actually the idea of how people are being nudged in the real world is something that is should be a concern to all of us, and a very important explosion in the computing possibilities as we now know them. So with that, we can advance to the next slide. Leading practices in getting to yes. Well, you know, I came up in the field, and for many years I have said, find reasons to say yes to collaboration, find reasons to say yes to get proposals out the door, find reasons to say yes to get the contract out the door. And I still say those things. Now, with data protection, you do have to take a little closer eye to make sure that no personal or sensitive corporate or sensitive university language is in proposals or in contracts. So you do have to keep an eye out for that. But the first bullet point kind of hits home on what really is a leading practice across much of research administration, which is to plan ahead with foresight. It doesn't matter what the project is. It doesn't matter what part of the university or what the discipline is. Part of our responsibility as research administrators is to add value to the faculty, add value to the institution. And most of the time, adding value means asking questions also. I'm not saying you should be a pest all the time, but certainly it is important to ask questions at an appropriate time of the faculty. And I've always come from the school of asking more questions up front, solving more problems up front will lead to less problems on the back end. And that goes to what I was talking about on Tuesday, which is sometimes sloppy contracts. Don't consider every possibility. Don't make it essentially airtight for your project, however it is constituted. And then you have problems that you have to clean up later. And it's always takes more time to clean up problems later than to do it right the first time. So plan ahead with foresight, and also document everything. And in the data protection and privacy area, that can be data issues within specific proposals. Make sure you document it, if only to put notes in the file or to print out emails and scan them and put them in an electronic file somewhere. It's, as research administrators, it's important for us to keep complete files that can be reviewed. And that way, if there are audit issues later, or if there are legal issues later, or if there are performance issues later, we can go back and say, hey, this is how we decided this question at that time. Another bullet point here, which applies to data protection issues and everything else in sponsored research, is what you say and how you say it is critical. That is the difference between faculty being happy with you, being unhappy with you, or faculty going to the provost or the university president complaining about you. And this is, communication is part art and part science, okay? And I think for all of us, we need refreshers in communication. And so I think opportunities to at Incure events or within a university HR suite of offerings, taking courses in communication and how to improve communication are critical. Communication in sponsored research now is quite different than it was 25 years ago. Now with the pandemic, we have much more video work going on than we did in person or traveling to conferences. And that has led to new expectations on etiquette and behavior on this medium that I'm talking to you today. So keep that in mind. This is one area of communication where we all, regardless of age, regardless of how long we've been in the profession, it's always important to keep your skills at a high level. When it comes to data protection and privacy, it's also important to set up knowledge sharing sessions with the faculty. Okay, for instance, something I'm doing with you today. This is a 1-hour session. This would be perfect to do for the faculty at Florida Gulf Coast University where I work. And in fact, I may just do that. But, you know, this is an opportunity for them to learn more about specific areas that they may not know much about, but it may also trigger questions from them. And it does give you the opportunity to show your knowledge and to build better relationships with the faculty. And of course, at the end of the day, a good half of sponsored research success is the relationships you build with the faculty. These sessions can include faculty panel discussions, leading practices. You know, we're talking about that here at FGCU. And as much as faculty would sit and listen to me talk for an hour on protecting data, you know, if you do a panel discussion on data protection from the faculty standpoint, you'll get a lot of faculty wanting to hear their colleagues talk. And that is an opportunity for the administrators and the faculty to get together and everybody have a learning community. Excellent way to put it. We should be building knowledge communities within our universities. And the last point, in terms of getting to yes and thinking about leading practices and adding value, is to say that data protection and privacy are not simply legal or Office of General Counsel concepts. Data protection is a frame of mind. Data protection is baked into a university culture. It's baked into a corporate culture, okay? You go into the private sector with all these companies setting up data protection offices and privacy offices. And the folks such as myself that are in the corporate world are saying to the CEO and the board of trustees or the board of directors, we need to build data protection into how we all do business in the company, in the university. Now, obviously, we're kind of late to the party, so you're retrofitting data protection into many companies and universities because it simply was not a big deal until a few years ago. But that being said, getting caught up now is better than not doing it. And if you're at a young university, this is a perfect opportunity because you don't have 100 years of culture that maybe you'd have and knowledge that is accumulated that you'd have to fight through. So it is one important thought for you to take away from today back to your universities to say data protection matters, personal privacy data, personal health information, PII, that matters. Let's bake protection into everything we do. And of course, in the corporate world, half of that battle is about how much it's going to cost. And sometimes it is a lot of money. And that question will come up in universities too, because all universities, and I only speak for the United States, you know, all modern American universities, whether they're not-for-profit or whether they're for-profit, are corporations, regardless of what the IRS tax code says. So in a general way, you know, Harvard University is a modern American corporation, or Caltech, modern American corporation. They all have, you know, educational and research and service and teaching missions, but we're all in many ways the same. And in data protection and privacy, there are commonalities between what the business world is going through, what local governments and state governments and the US government is going through, and what universities are going through. So if you're out there and you have some local government experience, if you work for the federal government or federal agencies that are near and dear to our funding priorities, you may start to see commonalities of prior experience that would be good at your current university. Next slide. These are my final thoughts. Some of these are more or less a restatement or a reaffirmation of what I've been talking about today so far. The first is basically that data protection and privacy are a state of mind. It is something that we have to inculcate within our universities. And it's excellent material to teach undergraduates. There's obviously great opportunities within graduate education, and there's great opportunities for faculty in their research enterprise to talk about data protection and privacy. And certainly for faculty that are in engineering schools, cybersecurity, arts and sciences, all of the STEM disciplines that work with large data sets, that's very important. Obviously, if you have like here, a health and human services college, you have, or nursing schools or academic medical centers, you have PII, PHI information all over the place. That's critically important too. One question I do want to leave with you today is whether data protection and privacy is a basic human right. The Europeans have said yes. I would say as an American, we should have that too. And I'll talk about that briefly once we get to the historical slides. A good best practice in the corporate world that I would like to see imported into higher education is to have data protection privacy champions on campus. Now, many companies name who the champions are. Maybe they're in divisions, you know, and in corporate subsidiaries and that sort of thing. But the idea of having specifically designated champions within universities is an idea that has great attraction to me, and I would urge you to think about that. Data protection and privacy issues, just like contracting, require really technical skill and interpersonal ability. I think all of us have been in roles in our career where we have some individuals who are technical wizards. They can talk anything. They can talk over your head. They get the technical part of it, but the interpersonal part, not so strong. Okay, this is a great opportunity to get better for all of us, and it's a great opportunity to reinforce that, you know, as research administrators, for us to be the best we can be for the faculty and to promote success and value on campus is to have not just technical knowledge, but also that interpersonal ability. Find reasons to say yes, not no. I've covered that. I think you can get that idea from a few ways we've talked about this today. When it comes to data protection and privacy, such as data transfer and use agreements and other agreements involving the transfer of data, think beyond the tried and true and think beyond the template. This is something I talked about Tuesday during the contracting seminar, because contracting is more than just templates. Okay, yes, you have the FTP templates that are very useful for standard subawards, and thank God we have them, because we didn't have them at one point in my career. Templates served their purpose, but the contracting world and big data and machine learning, artificial intelligence, everything in the technology end of what we do is rapidly advancing. And that means that the contracts will become more complicated. Not everything can be reduced to a template. And that is why I think if you're in this area, it does bleed into the contracting realm. And even if you don't have a contracting job, you do need to pay attention to this linkage between issues of data protection, privacy, and the contracting office. And the last thought I have for you here today, something I talked about on Tuesday also, is that in communication with faculty, with counterparts at other institutions, with funding agencies, with general counsel, with other university offices, both within your campus and elsewhere, that you should avoid sounding like a bureaucrat, which is what we are in a way, but I never liked the word for research administrators. But we don't want to sound like a bureaucrat, and we don't want to sound like a lawyer. Really what we want to do is add humanity to our work. And I think that's even more important considering what we have gone through with the pandemic and what we are continuing to go through with the pandemic. And I think that idea of humanity is even more important when more and more communication is being done this way through video. And things can be misinterpreted through video. And so keep that in mind. This really, I think, in the aftermath of what is this continuing pandemic, is that we should be adding a bit more humanity to the work we do, no matter what part of research administration you are in. Next slide. Here's my contact information, both my FGCU, my CUNY faculty address, and my private business address. If we don't have enough time to cover all the questions today, I'd be happy to take other questions offline. Once again, this is stuff that I've picked up in the last 5 years, and I'm just fascinated with, because it's really at the forefront of technology, and it's really the forefront of a brave new world. And I don't think we can all predict it, but having knowledge will make it a little bit easier to navigate. Next slide. Okay, this slide for your own time.
Before you go into the history, we do have a question.
Okay.
Would you like the question now, or do you want to do the history first?
Let's finish with the history, and then I'll dovetail back to the question.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, this slide you can read on your own. I'm not going to say much about it. This is really a short history of, on the American side, of privacy and data protection. And read it on your own time. I think a couple points are important here. That the Harvard Law Review article in 1890 did talk about a right to privacy as a right to be left alone. A product of its time, it is still taught in privacy and data protection courses. One of the co-authors is Louis Brandeis, who was later a Associate Justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. The 1973 FIPS principles are very influential with the Europeans later. And discussion of FIPS is now coming up again, because when you go to the bottom, you'll see that there is no federal overarching federal privacy law yet. There are proposals that have been in Congress, but quite frankly, the U.S. needs something that is overarching, equal to the scope of what the GDPR is, because otherwise what we now have, we are getting a patchwork of state privacy laws. Certainly many are modeled after the GDPR, like California, but you're getting a patchwork, which means state by state you have different requirements and rules, which can slow things down. I think on the research end, it gives work to lawyers, but that's not exactly the reason to have 50 different state privacy laws. But hopefully within the next year to two, we will have a omnibus overall federal privacy law. Next question. Next page, sorry. This is the truncated European history. In a way, they came later to the party than the United States, because they used the FIPS as inspiration for later initiatives. The 1995 Privacy Directive was great for its time, but it needed to be revised in light of new technology, in light of data breaches. And what you have today is the GDPR, which took effect in late May 2018. And for most of the world, right now, the GDPR is the gold standard, and many other countries in Asia and Africa are using the GDPR as a standard template but modified, of course, for local units. And the last point I'd leave here, in the GDPR, data protection and privacy is a right, not a privilege. That, I think, is something we really need to codify within U.S. statute. So take a look at that on your own time. We've covered all the material, and I'm ready now to take questions.
Okay, we've got a question from Ioanni Zabala, who says, we recently hired 2 AI faculty and may be hiring more. If there are specific questions we should ask, or if there is a template you can share, please do.
A template as to questions. I don't have a template for questions. I think if I were in your shoes and you had new AI faculty coming on board, I would start off with asking them, what kind of work do you anticipate doing? What kind of data do you anticipate using? Is any of the data going to involve subjects in the European Union for the GDPR, or other parts of the world for that matter? I think really for this hypothetical, depending on where they're coming from, depending on what their areas of focus are going to be, I think if you can flesh out that information, that would help trigger a second level set of questions.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, if you want to follow up with me outside this, I'd be happy to email any further thoughts you have.
I have a question myself, and I agree that it's almost always better if we can catch things at the proposal stage rather than at the contract negotiation stage. But sometimes things aren't obvious. Do you have some clues that we might want to be looking for that would tell us, hey, you better look a little bit deeper here?
I would say, probably playing devil's advocate, but with a smile on your face, okay? Because when you talk to the faculty, if you're not warm and engaging, they may think you're prying too much, or they think you have some evil intent if you work in administration, okay? Sometimes it would also help to preface it by saying, I want to ask you some questions about what you're doing, or how this involves data or personal data, because I want to be able to help you do what you want to do the best way you can. And as a research administrator, I'd like to provide value to you. And I think regardless of the area that you work in research administration, if you explain to the faculty with a smile on your face that you are asking these questions so that their work gets better, so the projects get funded, and so we are helping them with their research while protecting them and the institution's interests. And that goes across the board with many aspects. But once again, the tone, the smile, the demeanor, that goes a long way in, easing any maybe bad history someone had with your office, or that sort of way. Or I could say, since it is Thursday afternoon, I'd say, if you know the movie Pulp Fiction, you will know that there's a line in there that says personality goes a long way. Same thing with research administrators.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kelly Downing has got a situation here. She says, my institution is private and very decentralized. There is no centralization of data protection resources for the research departments. The departments point to the institution hands it back to the research department. Do you have any tips for data protection and privacy compliance in that type of setting?
I think the setting needs to change. I'm not saying create a completely new large structure that requires 30 people to be hired. But, you know, modern American corporations were forced with respect to the GDPR, because, you know, companies doing work in Europe had 2 or 3 years to get ready for the effective date of the GDPR. I'm thinking it was 2015 for a 2018 implementation date. But even with that, many American businesses and companies had problems for 1 to 2 years afterward getting the resources for a minimal centralized reporting operation. And I understand your university has a culture of decentralized, but that makes it very dangerous, because, you know, that would be like having a university with different, you know, departments and colleges submitting their own grants to a funder. The left hand does not know what the right hand's doing. And with so many data breaches and the damages that can be brought at trial, double and treble damages, you know, I would say to any university in the United States, I know you like a decentralized world, but we need some sort of consistently across all the academic units that data is handled and reported in a consistent fashion. I think the risk level is very high if everything remains decentralized and no one really knows what's going on.
Thank you. Sarah Carlson says, many sponsors require data management or data sharing plans. Do you see these common documents as an opportunity for universities to invest in or champion formalized, uniform, or consistent DPMP?
Absolutely. I mean, those requirements have been in place for a number of years in the profession, but that is just illustration of the trend that is underway. Okay. Mm-hmm. You know, I know a lot of faculty don't like compliance. They think it's a drag. It costs. It requires more administrative work. But really, in data protection and privacy, it is a form of compliance, but it's meant to protect sensitive personal and university information. And even people that don't like, you know, data protection or privacy or reporting structures for them, you know, their frame of mind kind of changes once data breaches have happened in their department or happened at their university, or God forbid, happened in their checking account. Then they say, oh yeah, you know, we really need some baseline system across the campus to protect in these important areas.
I've got an offline question here. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of working with the research IT team to make sure that PIs are using the most current standards to physically secure their data?
Repeat the first part of the question, Jennifer.
Can you talk about the importance of working with your research IT team to make sure that PIs are using the most current standards to physically secure their data?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so critical. I think by the year 2020, it should be, or 2022, it should be self-evident that every part of the university in these critical areas are talking to each other. Every school I worked at, going back at least 10 to 15 years, we've always had discussions with IT about these issues. And it's now accelerating because of the rise of big data sets and machine learning. And, you know, sticking our head in the sand and hoping the problems go away is not the way to properly protect the faculty or properly protect the university. And so absolutely, whether it's here, whether it's at your university, they should all be meeting to make sure that all the data, all the faculty data, all the university data is being protected. Obviously, it does involve money, and some schools have been loath to invest in those sort of things. But that is where you bring in allies from legal counsel, because this is all risk too now. And, you know, you want to minimize risk where you can. And in data protection and privacy, there is no room for error. You know, big reputational risk is at hand if your university data is breached. And I don't know one board of directors or board of trustees that's going to love to see their institution's name on the front page of the local paper or in the Chronicle saying that University X had 400,000 student records breached from a hack. So it is critically important that all parts of the university talk to each other.
So would you advocate for those that perhaps the universities haven't really formalized a process yet, as was mentioned in the first question, perhaps thinking about who the key stakeholders should be or would be, and trying to get people together so that they could be informed about the seriousness of this and come up with a roles and responsibilities matrix or some sort of decision tree or something to formalize the process?
Well, that's a great question. Corporate America has been doing that for a half dozen years to a dozen years now. And it goes from, really, this is a case where it needs to be top-down leadership. Okay, I know some faculty don't like that, but in data protection and privacy, really a best practice is that in the higher ed context, the board of directors, the president's cabinet, they should all be of one mind that data protection and privacy is baked into the operations of every part of a university, and then fan the roles and responsibilities down. That is what corporate America is doing. I don't see creating that sort of an architecture percolating up from individual faculty in independent departments. And like in my experience with research administration at different schools, having a provost, a university president, talk about the importance of this topic, that it matters to the leadership. That is a great way to bring the faculty in, okay? Because the leadership can set the goal, can set the tone, can set the mission. But then it's the university offices like IT and in the research division. And, you know, if you got a medical school or academic medical center, you got to bring those in, and all the academic units. And that's where you can bring in the stakeholders at the lower level. But if you were hoping that every unit within a modern university could come up with their own standard or statement on data protection and privacy, you're going to get a variety of different responses and no coordination. And really, this is one area that, you know, like I said, centralized direction, but with a smile on your face and with the money. And then give everybody else the opportunity to speak and give their input at whatever level of the university we are talking about.
Well, I know that at oftentimes research administrators can be the catalyst for the champion, because the provost may have other things on their mind, and someone has to raise the issue.
Yeah.
So I agree that it shouldn't be from the bottom up to provide leadership, but perhaps raising awareness is something that we can do, and then depend upon the leadership to carry it through.
Absolutely correct. Provosts have many things on their minds. They're the chief academic officer of the university. Many provosts from that alone would be very interested in data protection and privacy because of student data. Okay, now that may be handled over in student affairs in conjunction with IT, but that's an important part. And of course, you don't want to breach of student information, because that goes, you know, you're going to have a bunch of very irate parents of students at that point. And so it is, and many companies now, they talk about privacy champions. Some larger American universities have created privacy officer positions. I'm not quite sure they're all staffed sufficiently or resourced properly, but they do have someone that says privacy officer. And at a major university, one person is not enough. Some universities probably have privacy and data protection put into the legal office, the Office of General Counsel, figuring that all data protection and privacy is legal. But as I've said already earlier today, data protection and privacy is not just a legal concept, it's a cultural concept. And that is a perfect location of why research administrators can be champions in this area at your institutions. And many faculty, especially younger faculty that work a lot with AI and machine learning and large data sets, if you can speak that language to them like I can here, they really appreciate that expert counsel, and it gives them more confidence in the research office.
Thank you. Well, once again, I want to thank you for coming and sharing your extensive expertise with FRAC participants. This has been very informative, and it's an important issue, and we really appreciate your sharing, and we hope to see you presenting again next year at FRAC. And
thank you, Jennifer. It's been great, and thank you for serving as an MC.
You're very welcome.
Have a good day.